going, my friend?
Good. And as we get countdown to start of this, thinking back to like my fourth grade days where you see 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and you remember Contact in school, like you ever see that show like 3, 2, 1 Contact? Do you remember that back in the
No,
day? I might
no.
be dating myself.
You
So,
might,
but
you might be, you might be.
anyway, welcome everyone to Spinning Strategy, our inaugural episode with myself, Chad Greenlee, and my co-host Riley Mulane.
Yeah.
Welcome.
Well, I'm happy to be here with you, Chad. This is going to be a lot of fun.
Yeah, it's going to be a lot of fun. I just can't wait to dive in. You and I go back, oh gosh, how many years? When we first introduced, actually, when you came on a previous podcast of mine.
Yeah, we met through some mutual friends, and Kyle Steele, I think, was kind of the binding tie, and Arsalan
Kyle?
Noir.
Yeah, Arsalan.
Maybe it was Arsalan. Anyways, yeah, we met up, I think, like once a month. We made it a point to meet up really early in the morning, and that was very unnatural for me because I'm not a morning person at all. So I put on a brave face and had to have 3 cups of coffee before a conversation started. But we did it, and here we are now. Isn't it crazy how just these initial conversations of like getting to know each other, where it can just lead, like where relationships can lead in life, is just remarkable to me, honestly.
Well, I think it's remarkable too, because if you think that was like 2017 and here we are 7, 8 years later, even the idea of podcasts and stuff have changed. I mean, we're doing this virtually. I think back then I did a couple lavalier mics and didn't know what the heck I was doing. And we've benefited from a lot of things, personally and professionally.
Yeah, the technology is insane, and there's never been a better time if you are in the business of not just putting out content or creating content, but if there's things you want to say that pertain to your business, a message that you want to get out, a story you want to tell. I preach about this a lot to our team. Like there's no better time than right now to do it. And the learning curve isn't crazy. I mean, it does take some time to fully acclimate how to optimize your videos and to get good quality here and good quality there. But to your point, Chad, I mean, even 5 years ago, it was so much more difficult than it is now. So
yeah, access is everything, and technology just keeps going. I think I did a post last week or something that said there's something hiding actually as far as attracting and retaining talent in a business, and it is your ability to embrace technology. Think
100%,
about that.
100%.
You've got Gen Zers, you've got millennials, you've got ourselves. We've kind of grown up without technology as being connected all the time, but they don't know what a rotary phone is. They don't know. I mean, to ask them to print a piece of paper, that's even archaic, right? To keep it front. I mean, but if you're a business that isn't embracing technology and somebody comes in and be like, well, I have to learn the old school way that I've never seen in my whole life. Even schools, as archaic as maybe you could argue, whether it's in touch or out of touch, but they've embraced it and so you just have to, if you're embracing technology, you're staying ahead of it, you're going to keep people and you're also going to attract people. That's the way I think about
it. I agree. I think a lot about where and what will school, like I'm talking, I mean, elementary, middle school, high school, colleges, what is that world going to look like from not just a technology standpoint, but with the integration of AI. Elon Musk just put out a quote, I think one of his freshest quotes he put out. And who knows, I see this on Instagram, so who knows if that was AI generated. Who knows? But he said by 2029, AI will be more intelligent than all humans combined. And it will be everywhere we go. And there's a lot of people that think, I think it was Apple that just partnered with another tech company that they're essentially trying to graduate from the phone to things you wear. Like I have these, they're like the Meta.
You have these really cool glasses, don't you?
Meta smart glasses.
You have these cool glasses. You're that guy. Oh yes. My goodness. Yeah. That is beautiful.
I bought them just because I wanted to. But I don't know, man. I think about that a lot, and especially with kids. I have 9-year-olds, and they're twins, and they, for their birthday, got from their grandma or from their nana these Magnavox. I think she got them on Amazon. They were like $25, like CD boom boxes with your AM, FM, and then a CD player. And so my wife bought Isla, my daughter, Kids Bop, and then my son, the ultimate 80s mix. And they got the CDs. And my daughter goes, so like, what are these? Like, well, they're CDs, and you have a certain amount of tracks you can play. And like, she's used to like infinite scrolling on like Spotify, right? Like if she wants to hear something, hey Siri, play this. So to watch them take a few steps backwards to like be a part of the technology that at the time we thought was just so revolutionary is really wild as a parent,
Well, there's a few things that are happening along those lines too. Like there is a little bit of a movement and a shakeup of like physically owned assets as well amongst like Gen Z. You think of vinyl albums, you think of CDs, you think of anything that, well, VHS. I mean, there's just anything that you can physically own, because if you think about it, we live in a subscription-based world. We're renting everything.
100%.
I mean, it's just easier to access. So and I don't know this for sure. This may be something I made up, but I hear like when you even buy you buy something on like Amazon or Prime, that's a digital license. That's all it is. You're buying a license. You don't really own that, regardless of if you paid for it.
Yeah, no,
and that's sure that's in that T's and C's that you check every time to get there, but you don't physically.
I was just going to say, I heard a discussion that was talking about terms and conditions for that same scenario, right? Like, and I believe they were talking about the terms and conditions when you buy a physical DVD, that they can technically take that DVD, like the right to watch that DVD away. Now, again, would they ever do that? Has it ever been done in history? I don't think so. But to your point, we rent/lease everything. Like my cell phone, I essentially pay payments. Like I didn't buy this outright. Back in the day when you have a Nokia, I think it's Nokia, where you bought the phone for $230 and you took phone calls and you played Snake. Do you remember like going around? I would go around and like say, what's your high score on Snake? And you'd see some of these individuals. I'm like, how on earth, man? Playing it
right. What else are you not doing to get that high score on Snake? And then you thought the ringtones were the coolest, and it's crazy. Absolutely. What did I see the other day? I thought this was great. We used to save up our minutes to call everybody after 9 o'clock, and now we have unlimited minutes and we call nobody.
Yeah, exactly. Phone calls are
times
rare.
and technology have changed. And speaking of change and technology, I just want to dive a little bit here into Spin and Strategy, why you and I have reconnected and rekindled. And Spin and Strategy was a brainchild between both of us. If you haven't caught on, I am a business manager, business advisor by day. Riley, what are you? You are not.
That's a good question. I don't know what I am or who I am anymore, Chad. So I have been deep into the event industry for the last 17, 18 years, primarily as a DJ, but I've also worked with venues as a consultant. I continue to coach other event industry professionals on their businesses and branding and getting down to the nitty-gritty of their purpose. I'm just a big believer in purpose. Like, why are we doing this podcast, right? I mean, there's a million reasons why we're doing this together, because not only is it fun, but it brings a lot of fulfillment. And I think it can help be a conduit to other people and helping them in their life. But ultimately speaking, I'm a DJ. I am obsessed with music and music history and what music will do in regards to elevating a mood for other people. We talked a lot about kind of the psychology behind what I do, right? Like, I think after the 600, 700 weddings that I've DJ'd, without exaggeration, and some other crazy parties that are a conversation for a different day. But the things you do for
yeah, I would agree. Yeah, right. Yep.
the study of human pattern and behavior, and watching a room full of 200 people start off very cold for maybe cocktail hour, and by the time 11 o'clock rolls around and everybody's highly intoxicated, they got arms around each other and they're dancing together. So it's fun watching things unfold for better or worse sometimes. But anyways, I think our continued conversations, we've had a lot of binding ties between us where we tend to look at things, not everything the same way, but I mean, we just have a lot of contrast between what we do. That's just a lot of fun to talk about.
Yeah, and I think we'll see that as we continue to dive deep down the rabbit hole, where you kind of mix business, music, maybe your spin on how you've conducted business in more of like a B2C environment, and how we've translated that, and it kind of centers around kind of music and rhythm. There is kind of this dance and evolution and rhythm to, I think, what you and I are trying to do. As we kind of thought about this, there may be themes to each episode, underlying themes of how music and business have evolved. We'll definitely have segments. I mean, I know we've got the spin cycle, behind the booth, the encore, all those sorts of things that we'll get into, and we'll leave that for other people to edit. But I am first and foremost just excited to jam with you on a weekly basis and kind of give a behind the scenes of what you and I are obsessed to talked about. And I don't know if you've given any thought as to what weekly conversations you like to have that I can bring out as well. Like, what's excited you about this venture? We've been talking about it for about 4 or 5 weeks now.
Yeah, I'm excited and anxious to learn. I'll say to learn from you, right? Like to understand your perspective on certain things. And because like I said, there's a lot of professional differences between us. There's a lot of things that we practice as far as, I think we can find common ground with business fundamentals and communication and treating people with kindness and all of these things. But like your philosophy on growing and scaling, management, leadership, might be a little bit different than mine. So I'm excited to engage in conversations versus like being really preachy about here's the top 3 things you have to do and here's why. And it's like, no, let's talk about scenarios that most likely the listeners are dealing with right here, right now.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I think a lot of that stems from our experiences. I mean, you've been DJing for how many years?
17, 18 years roughly.
17 years.
I would like to say 17 to be conservative, but yeah.
I've been in a sales leadership advisory role for, I hate to say it, but 22 years now. I mean, I got the gray hair to prove it and the kids in college to spend it. So,
yeah.
But I think one thing that I really want to tackle today, and I know that you have gone through, and I have too, and I've been doing this a lot lately, and so much of your professional career, you have others like maybe training you or doing those sorts of things and kind of telling you how it should be how it should happen. But I don't know, it was maybe 10 years ago that I established my own personal development budget. And every year I kind of set aside time and investment to say, what am I going to skill up that's going to help me regardless of where I am, what I'm doing, and just what I'm doing in that circumstance of life. And it's not something that somebody tells me I have to do. It's not something that somebody pays for. It's what I do and what I choose. And I wanted to kind of dive into what some of those things were. And I know recently, you've launched a pretty good YouTube channel that's gaining some momentum, and you've gone down. I've seen you flash that YouTube formula book a couple times. But is that the personal development budget? Let's talk about that, because I think anybody that is doing anything business or for themselves, you have to protect yourself personally. But I look at ways that it complements everything I do.
Yeah, I agree. I think for me, roughly 6 months ago, we were working with a fantastic company that was producing our podcast and doing everything for us. And it was great. It was expensive. as it should be. I mean, the amount of time that they were dedicating to our podcast and helping us kind of produce the show and all that stuff was phenomenal, and a lot of value was found. Although for me, I'm a guy that loves technology. Being around speakers and microphones and XLR cables and DMX cables, like I love learning how things work to and how that translates into an experience, right? And so I decided to take on the podcast myself and fully immerse myself in the world of optimizing a YouTube channel, how you gain subscribers, what should the call to action be, what do audio interfaces do, what are the difference
You
between
geeked out. You're
microphones?
geeking out on it,
I
aren't
see
you?
you're rocking a Shure microphone. I mean, industry standard. You got to go with Shure. For
Of
anybody at
course.
home that's wondering, got to spend the money and just do it. And it took a long time for me to get into this kind of room, figuratively speaking, and kind of figure out like where the doors and where the windows are and why. And it's like, okay, those go together, that goes together. So the personal development side for me was doing it ourselves, knowing that it was going to be more time. It was going to be much more of a commitment. But what's interesting is the things that I learned in regards to not just recording and getting a good camera and the exposure and all of these things, meaning the camera exposure. And then you take that and you edit in a video editing software, how that leads to other things. So I bought a drone, and it's like, well, if I know how to edit our podcast and put these clips together in transitions and this and a music bed and all of these things, I'm going to buy a drone and take some shots of this and that. So it's wild when you look back on the last 6 months and what you've learned, right? And it's like, how often do people do that? How often do people take a self audit to say, okay, we can always be doomy and gloomy and all the things that we have to work on and all the places that we haven't been to yet in our business, or the money that we want to make that we haven't made yet. But like the things that you've been able to learn, I think is really important to take time and look at that and identify that, so it helps kind of fuel you to the next chapter.
Yeah. And I think it's interesting too, whenever you start something, it feels like if you're right-handed, you're writing left-handed and you're not seeing, the growth. But I think that's part of the process that you have to go through to actually do it. And, I remember it took you a full year of kind of publishing podcasts. And then it was early this year that it was just it seemed like it took a year to have an overnight success in a way.
Yeah.
Measured against yourself, not measured against anybody else, measured against yourself, right?
And I would say, whether you're creating content, I think this goes for anything in life, is to identify your audience and don't fight your audience, right? And
don't fight your audience. I like that.
And don't it kind of goes back to DJing. It's like, don't be too cool or too smart for the room. Like sometimes there's some songs that I think of, like Moni Moni by Billy Idol, or Don't Stop Believin' by Journey, Mr. Brightside by The Killers. Do I ever jam to those songs in my car when I'm driving from
come on, Mr. Brightside is on my playlist. Give me a break.
Only because as a DJ, it's every time, but they work every time. So I could sit there as a DJ and say, oh man, come on, I can probably find something better than Mr. Brightside. I'm going to play this for the last song of the night, and it falls flat. And when I train and coach DJs, that's one of the biggest things we talk about is know your audience. Speak to your audience, listen to your audience, and don't be too cool for the room. And it's not about you. And I think, in business, it's the same thing. It's like, if you're preaching culture or a brand, don't then live it, right? Like then be in it. Don't go the opposite way. I see businesses do that all the time.
Yeah, I like that. Don't fight the audience. Don't be too cool for the room. Those are some nuggets for the day. Yeah, a few years ago, I went down this personal writing journey, and I know I've talked to you about this a couple times. And I started with a group and a cohort. I saw this 30-day, publish in public for 30 days, and I was like, oh my gosh, like this. Why am I doing this? And I joined this cohort, and that was 3 years ago. And then 2 years after that, I decided to just belong to this ghostwriting school and academy. And that has done a couple things that I think. It has made my communication clearer and crisper. The way that I can do a presentation or the way that I structure everything is much, much different. And B, it's opened me up to a lot of relationships. People see things that you're doing, like, how do you do that? And I said, well, it took 3 years to kind of nail it down and figure it out for myself. Similar to golf, right? I get questions answered. I played college golf, and and when you've hit thousands and thousands of golf balls, it doesn't really leave you. Kind of like DJing, right? As a way.
Did you go to college on scholarship for golf, or no?
Well, we don't want to get anybody in trouble. At the time, it wasn't scholarship, but you got a lot of grants.
Got it. Okay.
And yeah, I didn't walk away with much debt. Let's put it that way. But it all worked out. But we had a good golf program. But I think when you've played enough, like, what it took yourself, and then people ask you for kind of like that secret sauce, that shortcut. Like, can you come look at me, or can you give me a DJ tip as an example? And it's like, I could, but for you to move the needle and for it to actually work, like, you're gonna have to wake up at like 5:30 a.m. and do this like 365 days in a row if you can.
Right.
And that one tip might work.
Yeah.
So, it's that's why I think like this personal development, like, obsession that I just wanted to kind of get out today is so important, because it's not does it move the needle for you overnight. It sets you on a process and a path to actually grow individually,
right,
and try and get better at something. And then how do you master it? And that's where the real challenge comes, I think. The mastery for some, what's your perspective? Like, you're coaching DJs as an example. To get somebody from like 0 to 75%, that's kind of the easy part. Totally. And then from 75 to like 90% good, like, it's a little bit harder, but man, that like last 10%, that's a whole different ball game, in my opinion.
And I think you either, at this point in the game, for me, this is just my personal opinion, I think you either have it or you don't, right? Because I can't teach self-awareness. I can't coach self-awareness. I can't coach social awareness. I can't coach, I shouldn't have to explain to a DJ or a fellow event professional why it's important to respond as quickly as you can to a lead, or to show up to a wedding early to set up so you're not making the ceremony start 20 minutes late. Like, I shouldn't even have to explain that. And I heard this performance coach probably 2 years ago, who was invited to speak to a Division I football team. And the coach reached out to this individual, and he was like, we know what your rate is for an hour to come in and speak. We're having some issues with our guys showing up to practice late, and they're just not inspired. And I would love for you to come in and try to fire them up. And he said, listen, there's not a keynote speaker in the world that's going to come in and like get them to shift that behavior, like to get them to be great. Because if you are on the path to greatness, I'm not saying you don't need coached. I'm not saying you don't need managed. But in my opinion, there are some individuals that don't need to be managed fully. They don't need to be coached day in and day out. Sometimes they just need to be left alone so they can do what they do. And then you just kind of polish here and polish there and remind them of this and remind them of things that they're probably missing. But it's hard to teach greatness, because to your point, if I wanted to, I'm a terrible golfer, but I want to be a really great golfer. But I'm not naive enough to think that if I go to the range an hour a week, that's going to help me exponentially. Like, it's a commitment. So how bad do you want it? And that's where you start to say, well, instead of doing this, I'm going to go and I'm going to do that. And I'm going to give this up and I'm going to go all in here. So my tolerance for those that say they're hungry, but really they're just in the mood for some like dessert doesn't work for me, because it's like when I was starving, like I would do whatever it takes. And so I can't help but just be attracted to those that are like, I am 100%. I'm 100% and I'll do whatever it takes. And those individuals, you can sense greatness and see greatness in them. And it's more enjoyable to be around those groups of
Yeah,
people.
there's a little bit of like scrappiness to it,
Yeah,
and hustle. At some point I want to get into kind of like the stages of business as I think of them, or the milestones of business. But there's like hustle, and then you kind of develop process, and then you may get some leadership. You may try to automate things at some point, but you don't go from like zero to automation without understanding. And I think that's where we get sidetracked.
For sure.
A little bit. But
yeah, I will say, for going back to your personal development, I will say, like, one thing that I think of, a word that comes to mind when I think of you and our communication that we've had and just any sort of exchange that we have, you're not only consistent, but you're very prepared. You know, you don't walk into a situation unprepared. And I'm a big believer in work ethic eliminates fear. Right? It's like, well, there's so many things you can do, and that really goes into the world of weddings, because for people that are listening that are married, maybe you've been married 20 years, maybe you're newlyweds and you're within that 1 year mark, you know how big of a day that was, and you know how expensive of a day that was. Regardless of where you got married, how many decorations you had and floral, if you had a band or I mean, things are expensive in the world of weddings, right? And instead of me having all of these sleepless nights of like, oh God, how am I going to execute? How am I going to, I'm coming in, I'm overpriced, and they're not going to think I'm going to have all this imposter syndrome. I'm going to have the most organized crates of music, digitally speaking. I'm going to have the nicest looking speakers. I'm going to tape things down in a meticulous way. I'm going to control everything in my power, and I'm giving it to God past that point. So, those are things I talk about too, like focus on what you can control. And I think when people actually stop and do that, Chad, they're like, man, I can control way more than I'm giving myself credit for. And that's something that I see with you, whether it's like video snippets of like recapping our past conversation, what you're doing and what's our responsibility next, like having that accountability, I think really moves the needle. And you are a shining example of that when we've worked together with some of the stuff that we had going on. Our other
I appreciate that, and I think when anybody steps into a room where you're at too, your goal, I think, is a little bit different. It's not to be maybe the spotlight; it's to create the experience.
Correct.
And next time I want to dive into that, and I'll give a little sneak peek when we end here. But that I appreciate that, because there's this fear too, I think, of how much do you prepare versus execute and just do it. And I think at some point, there is a law of diminishing returns in preparation. But I always go back to, if you ever seen the movie The Mechanic, where there's this great saying where the preparation, or victory loves preparation. And that is like, when you see these montages of, people doing things, and you're like, how did they get it to work out like that?
Yeah.
Right. And I always think about the level of preparation that you can have. You tend to be less anxious and should have less anxiety. And if something happens, well, I've thought about step 2, 3, and 4, right?
Yep.
Like, what if your speakers don't work? Well, what if there's not power that comes through? Well, what if the power goes out? What am I going to do? You've got all those things. Me, it's like, what if my plane arrives late? What if I have no sleep? And what if my notes are all gone? And I was actually talking with our team last week, and I said, think of your personal keynote as an example, as if you had an hour to prepare and speak for like 45 minutes, what is that one thing that you could talk about all the time and get really good? And all you really have to know is your first 5 minutes of your intro, 3 or 4 bullet points that'll get you started, and then how you're going to close and call to action. That's the framework.
Yeah.
It's a framework. And
what do you have in your back pocket, right?
Yeah. And I think I told you, and that leads me kind of into kind of the last thing I want to hit upon here is, every week I want to talk about kind of what you're obsessed over. And I just hit it on the head. I'm obsessed over frameworks. And, like, I'm constantly thinking of why I do the same things the same way all the time. And is there a framework to why I do certain things? And I'm coming off of a weekend where I shook things up just to get out of to do it the same way, and I just relaxed on it, actually. And I was like, how do I pull away a little bit, because I've been doing the same thing, the same routine every morning. And I was like, you know what, I'm gonna kind of do that Saturday morning cartoon. I like anti-frameworked it, but then this morning I got back into it and I was like, okay, how do I structure things? How do I do things if I'm doing the same thing every time? And if I need to explain it to somebody so they can set it up, like, what's the framework, right? Like, I just gave you a framework of like a keynote as an example.
Yeah.
Like, you don't have to bottle it. You can bottle it up, but know your topic, 3 bullet points in your closing and your intro. That's it.
Yeah.
You could write it on a napkin. You could go present it.
Yep.
Kind of like how I do this podcast. It's a framework of, here's how we're going to start. Here are some topics we're going to end with, and then I know how the ending's going to go.
Yeah, it's like how can you keep it as an organic conversation, but also have a way to captivate an audience subconsciously, right?
Yeah.
I mean, how can you orchestrate something that feels very much like a conversation at a coffee shop? Like that to me is how, whether it's doing the other podcasts I do with Megan, the Ann and Ellis podcast, or if I have a guest on, if I'm meeting with a client, I can't help but just turn things into just a conversation versus something that is, I don't want to even say rigid, but just very predictable, you know? And I think that's the beauty of where businesses can be in 2024 and beyond, is they can set expectations through their branding, through their content, and you just kind of know what you're getting, right? It's like if I had $200,000 burning a hole in my pocket and I wanted to buy a vehicle, I kind of know where I'm going to go. And I also know the experience that I'm going to have when I walk into a Ferrari dealership or I walk into a Porsche delership. And now I could go get something else.
So that's where you're going. Ferrari or Porsche with 200 grand burning. Okay. All right.
A $200,000, what I would get is I would Backdraft Racing. They make Shelby Cobra, I don't even say replicas, they're like spec cars, and they build them. They like licensed it through Carroll Shelby. Those are about 125 and change. So I'd have some money left over for the real fun things to soup that up. But
when this thing blows up and you're in your other podcast and you buy one of those, we're gonna the first week we're gonna film from that, and It's gonna be like a car podcast karaoke style event.
I dream of that car. I dream of it. Just
so that's an obsession for you. But
it is an obsession. What I have been obsessed with since, honestly, the moment I stepped into the event industry, and even more so, like the fire is burning that much stronger right here, right now, is I am fascinated and, dare I say, obsessed with luxury brands that stay consistent with the consumer experience, and more specifically, how you can empower employees to buy in, right? And I think the age-old example would be like Disney, right? I don't know Disney well enough to know if it's diminished or if it's gotten even more elevated as far as customer service. I mean, you walk into Disney, you spend $1,000 just looking at a souvenir, right? But I'm talking more like Four Seasons. I'm talking about the Wynn Casino. I'm talking about, again, luxury car dealerships, luxury real estate agents that are selling, $4 or $5 million houses, how they can build a brand that has so many expectations facing it, right? From a client, how you can stay true to the brand and how you can continue even just elevating from there. Because I look like Texas Roadhouse, right? I mean, not the best steaks in the world. I got good ribeye and stuff and good fillets, but like, it's just, I think I look at a lot of restaurants that don't make it, or bars that don't make it. And a lot of that might have to do with like the geographical location and, just maybe it just doesn't work. Maybe the prices are just way off. But so much of it is like, well, we can't find help, or we can't get people in here. We just can't advertise the right way. And then you have places like Texas Roadhouse. You go there Thursday at 4:00 in the afternoon and it's packed. And I think, to me, it's just, what you're getting. Like there's really never any surprises there, at least in my personal experience.
Yeah, surprise and delight. I mean, that's a good obsession. That'd be a great topic for us to dive into. Do you watch The Bear? The show The
My
Bear on
mom
Hulu?
texted me about 3 months ago and told me to watch that. I haven't watched it yet, so sorry, Mom.
They're like season 2. I'll forward it to you. Like season 2, you dive into an episode, and one of the characters gets to go and visit like a Michelin restaurant, and they start him off just like everybody else, and he is like polishing forks. I mean, literally polishing forks, and he's like, when am I going to learn the rest? And he's like. And the guy's like, until you get really good at polishing forks.
Yeah.
And he like gets really upset, ticked off, and he goes like out, and the guy turns around and he kind of said something, and I'd have to go back and watch it, but it was something to the effect of, we don't have to polish forks here. We get to polish forks, because that is the kind of detail that matter to people that are waiting like months to get into this restaurant.
Yeah.
And once you understood that, and it went into this whole montage of things, and it's just amazing. I've never been to a Michelin rated restaurant, and I think I'd enjoy the experience. Someday I might have to save up for like a Shelby card probably to go to one, but yeah, I think that's kind of what you're getting into, is kind of that obsession.
Yeah, empowering everybody around you in regards to the organization to cast the same vision. When I was at Disney, this was right before COVID. I'm talking late February of 2019. So it was right before. Talk about perfect timing. Not that we knew the world was going to shut down for however long. But anyways, we're at Disney World. And so it's me and Melissa, my wife, and 2 kids. And we're trying to find, is it the Haunted Mansion? I think. I don't know. Don't quote me on that. We were trying to find that, I believe. And we couldn't find it. Like, we were looking at the map and things just weren't making sense to us. And there was 2 employees. One was running a powered, I'll call it like a street sweeper, basically, that just sucks in garbage and does it. And it's just like, and then somebody else is sweeping the garbage into it. So they're like, and they got their their headphones on or whatever, cancel out the noise. And they saw us out of the corner of their eye, and they shut down the machine.
Everything shut down.
Walked over to us. You guys look like you need to figure out where you want to go. And it's like, yeah, we do. And I watched that whole thing play out, where they could have easily just ignored us. I mean, I don't know.
Not their job.
I got a job to do. I mean, I got to sweep these stupid streets. Like, oh God, I feel like I'm suited for a better position than this. But no, it's like, they didn't just understand their role, but they found a lot of fulfillment in, oh, look, somebody needs help. Like, let's power it down. Let's do what we got to do. That is what I'm obsessed with. Like, how can you get a group of people to buy in, to really buy in?
I love that. Yeah. Well, we've covered a lot in a very short amount of time, and we've got a lot more to talk and jam about. I mean, I'm very interested in your background, and I think I really want to dive into that in the next episode. Is dive into the business of Riley Mullane. And I think there's a lot of skeletons in that closet, good, bad, and ugly. And I want to hear some stories if you're game. So you got a little bit to think about between now and next week.
We'll have to do like an unrated episode that's like behind a paywall or something to like.
Oh, I love that idea. I love that idea. This is the suitable for work version, and this is the after hours wedding DJ horror stories. I think it could just be awesome.
Yeah.
So,
and I also want to dive in as these episodes progress. I want to dive into your sales strategy and the things that you've learned, because sales to me is, man, it is fascinating, because there are really good salespeople and really bad salespeople. And obviously, you have been somebody that's found a lot of success, which means you're doing things the right way. And I want to dive deeper into kind of a more granular level of things that you've learned, things that maybe you started off like, well, that wasn't the right approach, versus kind of where you're at now. Because I know you're very comfortable with, because I think you got to be comfortable with who you are before you start selling anything to anybody else.
Yeah, that's a rabbit hole conversation, and
Sure is.
we should get into that after next week when because we've got a whole 18 years to unpack in that wedding industry, 17, 18
Right.
years. So,
well, listen, Chad, it's a blessing to be able to do this podcast with you, and this is going to be a lot of fun. And I hope people that are listening and watching find some enjoyment, and maybe they'll find some humor in this, or maybe we'll just touch on something that you're dealing with. And to me, like, that's the whole point, right? And is to try to be as relatable as possible.
Yeah, whoever thought like a business advisor, business manager would get together with a wedding DJ and host a podcast, and we'll unpack that, I'm sure, more and more to come. So stay tuned next week, everyone, as we keep this show going on Spin and Strategy. I'm Chad Greenlee.
And I'm Riley Mullane.
And we'll see you guys next week.
Thank you all.